The final hymn faded into the cavernous silence of the chapel. A few distant coughs, the rustle of a coat, the soft, respectful click of the heavy oak doors closing one last time. They were all gone. The distant relatives who had offered condolences that felt like lines read from a script, my grandmother's bridge club friends with their powdered faces and trembling lips, even the pastor with his well-meaning but hollow words. All gone. I was alone, a solitary island in a sea of empty pews and the cloying, sweet scent of lilies. My grief was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, making the simple act of breathing a conscious effort. I sat in the front row, my hands clasped in my lap, staring at the polished mahogany casket that held the last person on earth who had truly known me. I should have left. I should have stood up, walked out into the crisp autumn air, and driven back to the house that was now just a collection of rooms filled with her absence. But my legs felt like lead, and my will had evaporated with the last note of the organ. So I sat, listening to the silence, letting it seep into my bones. Footsteps, soft and measured on the plush carpet, approached from behind. I didn't turn. I knew who it was. Mr. Blackwood, Julian, the funeral director. Throughout the entire ordeal, from the first phone call in the dead of night to the final selection of flowers, he had been a pillar of quiet competence. He moved with an unhurried grace that seemed to absorb the chaos and panic of others, leaving only a calm stillness in his wake. He was tall, with dark hair that had a slight wave to it, and his eyes were a deep, steady gray that seemed to see everything without judgment. His suit, a charcoal wool, fit him perfectly, and he smelled faintly of sandalwood and clean linen, a scent that cut through the funereal florals. He stopped beside my pew but didn't speak. He just stood there, his presence a silent offer of support. I had spent the last 3 days observing him, cataloging the small details. The way he would subtly guide a grieving family member to a chair, a hand hovering just above their elbow, never touching unless invited. The low, reassuring murmur of his voice that could soothe the most frantic sob. The way his gaze would linger for a moment too long, not with pity, but with a kind of profound, shared understanding. I had found myself watching for him, relying on his quiet strength to get through each fresh wave of sorrow. After a long moment, the silence was broken by the definitive, heavy thunk of a lock engaging. My head snapped up. I turned to see him standing by the main chapel doors, his hand still on the large brass key. He turned it a second time. Another thunk echoed in the empty space. He was locking us in. My heart gave a strange, panicked flutter. What was happening? He walked back toward me, his steps still unhurried, his expression unreadable. He stopped at the end of the pew, his tall frame silhouetted against the stained glass window behind him. The afternoon sun cast him in hues of deep blue and crimson. "Stay, please," he said. His voice was low, not a request so much as a gentle command. He rested a hand on the polished wood of the pew, his long fingers splayed. Then, he moved it, placing it softly on my shoulder. The warmth of his hand seeped through the fabric of my suit jacket, a small point of heat in the cold emptiness that surrounded me. It was the first time he had touched me directly, a firm, grounding pressure. My breath hitched. I could feel the texture of the wool beneath his palm, the solid weight of his presence beside me. I looked from his hand on my shoulder to his face. His gray eyes held mine, and for the first time, I saw something beyond professional compassion. I saw a flicker of something else, something personal. And for some reason, I wasn't scared. I just nodded. He gave my shoulder a slight, reassuring squeeze before withdrawing his hand. The absence of his touch was immediate and sharp. He gestured with his head toward a small, unmarked door near the chancel. "Come. The air is too heavy in here." I followed him without a word, my legs finally obeying. We walked through the door into a short hallway, leaving the oppressive scent of lilies and sorrow behind. He led me into what looked like a private study. It was a world away from the public spaces of the funeral home. The walls were lined with dark wood bookcases filled with leather-bound volumes. A thick Persian rug covered the floor, and 2 worn leather armchairs were situated in front of a small, unlit fireplace. A single lamp on a heavy desk cast a warm, golden glow over the room, making it feel like a sanctuary. Julian moved to a small sideboard where a decanter of amber liquid and 2 crystal glasses sat. "Whiskey?" he asked, his back to me. Please, I managed, my voice raspy. I heard the clink of the glass stopper, the smooth glug of liquor being poured. I sank into one of the armchairs. The leather side under my weight, cool and soft. It felt like the first time I had truly relaxed in days. I watched him. His movements were economical and precise. He added a single ice cube to each glass from a small silver bucket before turning and walking toward me. He handed me a glass, his fingers brushing against mine as I took it. The contact was brief, almost accidental, but it sent a jolt through me. I wrapped my cold hands around the tumbler, the chill of the glass a stark contrast to the memory of his warm touch. He sat in the chair opposite me, the space between us feeling both vast and intensely intimate. He didn't drink, just held the glass, swirling the contents so the ice cube clinked softly against the crystal. The sound was hypnotic in the quiet room. For a long time, we just sat in silence. It wasn't awkward. It was a comfortable, shared quiet, a respite from the forced conversations and emotional demands of the day. He seemed to understand that I didn't have any words left. He wasn't trying to fill the space with platitudes. He was just present. I took a sip of the whiskey. It was smooth, smoky, and burned a welcome path down my throat, settling as a pool of warmth in my stomach. I looked at him over the rim of my glass. In the soft lamplight, the professional mask had slipped just a little. There were faint lines of exhaustion around his eyes, and a single strand of dark hair had fallen across his forehead. He looked less like an archetype of stoicism and more like a man. A tired man. "Why did you ask me to stay?" I asked, the words feeling loud in the stillness. He met my gaze. His gray eyes were clear, direct. He took a slow breath before answering. "You looked like you were about to shatter into 1,000 pieces," he said simply. "And there was no one here to catch them." His honesty was a punch to the gut. He was right. My grandmother was my anchor, the only family I had left. My parents had passed away years ago in a car accident, and I was an only child. Her house was my childhood home, her presence the only constant in my life. Now, that constant was gone. I was adrift, and the thought of going back to that empty house, of facing the silence and the memories alone, was terrifying. He saw it. In a room full of people, he was the only one who had truly seen me. Tears pricked at the back of my eyes, hot and unwelcome. I had been so determined to hold it together, to be the responsible grandson, to handle everything with quiet dignity. But his simple, perceptive statement had undone me. I looked down into my glass, blinking rapidly, fighting a losing battle. "I'm sorry," I choked out, mortified. "This is unprofessional." "There's nothing unprofessional about grief, Leo," he said, his voice soft. He leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees. "And we are no longer in a professional capacity. The service is over. I'm just a man, sitting with another man who has had a very difficult day." He used my name, Leo. Hearing it from his lips felt different. It grounded me. I took another, larger swallow of whiskey, letting the burn chase away the lump in my throat. I risked a glance at him. He was watching me, his expression one of quiet concern. There was no pity there, only a deep, unnerving empathy. "What was her favorite song?" he asked, changing the subject so smoothly it felt like a natural continuation of the conversation. I was taken aback. "What? Your grandmother?" "Not a hymn. Her favorite song. The one she'd hum while she was cooking or gardening." The question was so unexpected, so personal. It broke through the fog of procedural grief. I thought for a moment, a genuine smile touching my lips for the first time in what felt like an eternity. "Claire de Lune," I said. "She played it on the piano. Badly, but with a lot of heart." A ghost of a smile touched his own lips. It transformed his face, softening the severe lines of his jaw. "That's a beautiful choice." He took his first sip of whiskey, his eyes never leaving mine. "My father was a carpenter. He smelled of sawdust and varnish. He used to whistle, always off-key, while he worked in his shop. It's the first thing I remember when I think of him. He was sharing a piece of himself. A small, vulnerable piece. It was an invitation. He was building a bridge across the space between us, one quiet confession at a time. I found myself wanting to walk across it. "I'm going to have to sell the house," I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. I can't live there alone. Every corner holds a memory of her. The worn spot on the arm of her favorite chair. The chipped teacup she always used. The scent of lavender in her closet, My voice broke on the last word. Julian didn't say, "I'm sorry for your loss," or "It will get better with time." He just nodded slowly, his gaze full of understanding. "Memories are ghosts that live in houses," he said, his voice a low murmur. "Sometimes you have to let them go so you can find your own space to breathe." We talked for what felt like hours. Or maybe it was only minutes. Time seemed to have warped in that warm, quiet room. I told him about my grandmother, about her stubborn independence and her terrible jokes. I told him about my job as a graphic designer, a solitary profession that suited my introverted nature. He listened, really listened, asking gentle questions that drew more stories out of me. He told me about growing up in the apartment above this very funeral home, a strange childhood of hushed tones and black suits. He spoke of his decision to take over the family business, not out of obligation, but out of a sense that he could provide a quiet place for people in their loudest moments of pain. With every word exchanged, I felt a layer of my carefully constructed armor fall away. I was raw, exposed, but I didn't feel threatened. I felt seen. He wasn't just Julian Blackwood, the impeccably dressed funeral director. He was Julian, a man with his own ghosts, his own quiet sorrows. And I wasn't just Leo Vance, the grieving client. I was Leo, a man he had chosen to lock in a chapel because he saw that I was drowning. The light outside the window had faded from gold to a deep, bruised purple. The room was cast in shadow, the only light coming from the single lamp on the desk. Our glasses were empty. The conversation had dwindled back into a comfortable silence. The air between us was thick with unspoken things. I could feel the pull of it, a strange, magnetic hum. He stood up and walked over to the desk, shuffling a few papers. It felt like a dismissal, a return to the roles we were supposed to be playing. A knot of disappointment tightened in my stomach. Of course, the moment was over. He had been kind, incredibly so, but it was time for me to go back to my empty house, to my solitary life. I started to push myself up from the chair, my limbs feeling heavy again. "Thank you, Julian," I said, my voice thick with emotion. For everything. I don't know what I would have done today without you." He turned from the desk, and the look on his face stopped me cold. The professional calm was gone, replaced by an expression of such intense vulnerability it stole the air from my lungs. His gray eyes were dark, searching. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, stopping directly in front of my chair. He was so close I could feel the heat radiating from his body. I had to tilt my head back to look up at him. "There was no one else here for you today, Leo," he said, his voice barely a whisper. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, a fact that laid my loneliness bare for him to see. "Are you shouldering all of this alone?" My throat closed up. All I could do was nod, a single, jerky movement. The last of my composure crumbled. A tear I hadn't even realized was forming slipped from my eye and traced a hot path down my cheek. I felt it, a tiny, shameful betrayal. Before I could wipe it away, he reached out, his movements slow, deliberate. He cupped my jaw, his thumb gently brushing away the tear. His skin was warm, his touch impossibly gentle. My mind goes blank. I am no longer in a funeral home. I am no longer grieving. I am simply here, under the gentle weight of this man's hand. The calluses on his thumb are a rough, grounding counterpoint to the overwhelming softness of the moment. His scent, sandalwood and something uniquely him, fills my senses. I stop breathing. I am waiting. He didn't pull away. He held my face, his thumb stroking my cheekbone in a slow, hypnotic rhythm. His gaze dropped from my eyes to my lips. The air crackled. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the frantic, thudding beat of my own heart. This couldn't be happening. It was grief. It was gratitude. It was the whiskey. It had to be. But then he leaned down. He moved with that same unhurried grace, giving me every opportunity to pull away, to stop him. I didn't. I couldn't. I was frozen, caught in the gravity of his gaze. My own eyes fluttered shut as his lips met mine. It wasn't a kiss of passion or desperation. It was a kiss of profound tenderness. It was soft, hesitant at first, a question. His lips were warm and surprisingly pliant. I felt a shudder run through my entire body, a release of tension I hadn't even known I was holding. I leaned into him, my hands coming up to grip the front of his jacket, clinging to him like a lifeline. He answered my silent plea, deepening the kiss. It was still slow, still gentle, but now there was a current of longing beneath it. It was a kiss that spoke of shared loneliness, of a deep, unspoken recognition. It tasted of whiskey and sorrow and a fragile, burgeoning hope. It felt like coming home after a long, cold journey. It felt right. When he finally pulled back, it was only by an inch. He rested his forehead against mine, his eyes still closed. I could feel his breath, warm and steady, against my skin. We stayed like that for a long moment, just breathing together in the near darkness. "Leo," he whispered, his voice thick. He didn't say anything else. He just said my name, as if it were a prayer. He eventually drove me home. The car ride was silent, but it was a different kind of silence now. It was filled with the reverberations of that kiss, with questions that hung unanswered in the air between us. When he pulled up to the curb in front of my grandmother's house, he cut the engine. For a moment, neither of us moved. The darkness of the street was absolute, save for the single porch light I had left on that morning a lifetime ago. "I don't expect," I started, then trailed off, unsure of what I was even trying to say. That I didn't expect this to mean anything? That I didn't want to be a moment of pity for him? He turned to me, his face illuminated by the faint glow of the dashboard. "Don't," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "Don't try to explain it away. Not tonight." He reached across the console and took my hand, his fingers lacing through mine. His grip was strong, sure. "Get some sleep. I'll call you tomorrow." It was a promise. I clung to it. I nodded, unable to speak, and squeezed his hand before letting go and getting out of the car. I didn't look back as I walked up the path to the front door. I heard his car idle for a few moments before pulling away, the sound of the engine fading into the quiet of the night. The next morning, I woke up in a state of profound confusion. Sunlight streamed through the bedroom window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. For a split second, I forgot everything, and then it all came rushing back. The funeral, the empty chapel, the quiet study, Julian. The kiss. My hand flew to my lips, as if I could still feel the phantom pressure of his. Anxiety, cold and sharp, pierced through the memory's warmth. What had I done? What had he done? It was a mistake. A moment of intense emotional vulnerability that we had both acted on. He was my funeral director. I was his grieving client. The professional lines had been so thoroughly blurred, they were obliterated. He would regret it. He would wake up this morning, mortified, and I would become a source of professional embarrassment for him. The thought made my stomach churn. I spent the day in a haze, wandering through the silent rooms of the house, avoiding my phone. Every time it buzzed with a text from a well-meaning friend, my heart leaped into my throat, thinking it was him. I dreaded his call, and I yearned for it. He had said he would call, but the hours ticked by, and the phone remained silent. By late afternoon, I had convinced myself it was over. The promise had been a kindness, a way to let me down gently. He wasn't going to call. The shame was a bitter pill. At 5 o'clock, just as the sky was beginning to bruise with the evening, my phone rang. The screen lit up with an unknown number. My breath caught. I stared at it for 3 full rings before my thumb, seemingly of its own accord, swiped to answer. "Hello," I said, my voice barely a whisper. Leo, it was him. His voice was just as I remembered it. Low, calm, steady. It sent a shiver down my spine. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "No, not at all," I said, trying to sound casual and failing miserably. There was a pause. I could hear the faint sound of traffic in the background on his end. "I meant what I said last night," he said, his voice direct, leaving no room for misunderstanding. "I'd like to see you again, away from all of this, if you'd be open to it." Relief washed over me so intensely my knees felt weak. I sank down onto the bottom step of the staircase. He wasn't regretting it. He was following through. He was real. "Yes," I said, the word coming out with more force than I intended. "Yes, I'd like that." Another small, almost imperceptible pause. "Good," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "How about coffee? Tomorrow morning? There's a small place on Elm Street, the Daily Grind." "I know it," I said. 10 o'clock. 10 o'clock is perfect. I'll see you then, Leo." "Julian," I said, stopping him before he could hang up. "Thank you." "There's no need to thank me," he said softly. "I'll see you tomorrow," and then he was gone. The next morning felt like the first day of a new life. I stood in front of my closet for 20 minutes, trying to decide what to wear, a ritual I hadn't performed in years. I settled on jeans and a simple gray sweater, wanting to look like myself, not the man in the ill-fitting black suit he had known. Walking into the coffee shop felt like stepping onto a stage. The place was bustling with the morning rush, the air thick with the scent of roasted coffee beans and steamed milk. I saw him immediately. He was sitting at a small table in the corner, away from the window. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was in dark jeans and a navy blue Henley that stretched across his broad shoulders. He looked younger, more relaxed. He looked approachable. He saw me, and that small, rare smile touched his lips. He stood as I approached the table. It was a simple, gentlemanly gesture, but it made my heart beat a little faster. "Hi," I said, feeling suddenly shy and awkward. We were strangers who had shared one of the most intimate moments of my life. "Hi," he replied, his gray eyes warm. "I'm glad you came." The initial conversation was stilted. We talked about the coffee, the weather, the general awkwardness of meeting like this. It was a strange dance, trying to find our footing on this new, unfamiliar ground. The man across from me was the same one who had held my face in his hands, yet he was also a complete stranger. He must have sensed my unease. He put his coffee cup down and leaned forward, his expression turning serious. "Leo, can we not do this?" "Do what?" I asked, confused. "This," he said, gesturing to the space between us. The awkward small talk. Pretending we're on a normal first date. He took a breath. "I saw you in my chapel for 3 days. I saw the way you held yourself together for everyone else. The way you greeted every person with grace, even though you looked like you were seconds from collapsing. I saw your loneliness because it looked a lot like my own." I stared at him, speechless. "Asking you to stay, kissing you. It wasn't born from pity," he continued, his voice low and earnest. "It was recognition. I've spent my life surrounded by grief, living in the quiet spaces people leave behind. It makes you a keen observer of people. And I observed you. And I wanted to know the man who loved his grandmother so fiercely he couldn't bear to leave her side, even at the very end. He laid it all out, his own vulnerability a shield for mine. He was giving me an explanation, an assurance, a foundation to build on. My life is quiet, Julian. I confessed, finding my voice. It's small. I work from home. I don't have a lot of friends. Since my grandmother got sick, my world has just been her. I don't know who I am without her." "Then let's find out," he said simply. He reached across the table and covered my hand with his. His touch was as warm and grounding as it had been in his study. Together, that coffee turned into a walk in the park. The walk turned into a late lunch. We talked for hours, filling in the sketches of our lives. I learned that he loved old black and white movies, that he was a surprisingly good cook, and that he had a dry, witty sense of humor that was a delightful contrast to his stoic demeanor. He learned that I was a terrible gardener despite my grandmother's best efforts, that I was obsessed with historical documentaries, and that I had a sarcastic streak I usually kept hidden. In the weeks that followed, he became a quiet, steady presence in my life. He helped me with the monumental task of sorting through my grandmother's belongings. It was a painful, heartbreaking process, but doing it with him made it bearable. He didn't rush me. He would sit patiently on the floor, handing me boxes, listening as I recounted the story behind a faded photograph or a silver locket. He made the cavernous silence of the house feel less like an absence and more like a peaceful quiet. One evening, after a long day of packing books into boxes, we were sitting on the back porch, drinking beer and watching the sunset paint the sky in strokes of orange and pink. The air was cool, carrying the scent of wood smoke from a neighbor's fireplace. "You know," I said, breaking the comfortable silence, "I think I'm ready." He turned to look at me, his expression questioning. "To sell the house," I clarified. "It's not a house full of ghosts anymore. It's just a house. The memories are mine to keep now. I can take them with me." He smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile that made my chest ache with affection. "Where will you go?" he asked. I looked at him, at the way the fading light caught in his dark hair, the way his gray eyes seemed to hold all the peace in the world. I thought of his quiet apartment above the funeral home, the sanctuary of his study, the simple comfort of his presence. I no longer felt like an island. I felt anchored. I reached out and took his hand, our fingers lacing together naturally, a perfect fit. "I don't know yet," I admitted honestly. But for the first time in a very long time, I don't feel like I'll be going there alone. He brought my hand to his lips and pressed a soft kiss to my knuckles, his eyes never leaving mine. In that quiet moment, with the world bathed in the soft glow of twilight, I knew I had been wrong. The memories weren't ghosts I had to leave behind. And he wasn't just a man who had caught me when I shattered. He was the one who had shown me how to put the pieces back together, creating something new, something stronger, something that felt, finally, like home.